John, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm very glad to be here.
So tell me, I mean, you have been interested in basic income as a concept for about 4 decades now. How did you get interested in it in the first place? And what did the conversation around it look like back then?
Well, I'm a political theorist, and I've mostly worked on questions of equality and arguments for equality. And back in the 1980s, I met a Belgian political theorist named Philippe van Parijs, who is a big proponent of basic income. And he asked me to have a look at whether I thought that there was good egalitarian argument for basic income. I said, okay, I'll have a go. And I did some work on that, and I decided that there was a very good egalitarian argument for basic income. And I've been in the basic income movement ever since. So that was around 1990 or so. And haven't looked back.
And over the years, the interest in this as an idea for something that countries could actually implement has grown a lot. And now we have the situation in Ireland where they're not introducing a universal basic income that's for everyone, but they are going to make permanent, or at least more permanent, this kind of basic income for artists, which is quite exciting and interesting. To people who haven't really thought that much before about how this kind of scheme could work, it might not feel intuitive that if you give people, 325 euros a week, they'll actually end up working more and relying less on welfare, which I think is what has actually happened in the case of these Irish artists. You'd think people would just work less and be lazier. Why does it work?
Well, basically, a basic income gives you a platform from which to live your life the way you want to. And most people in general want to make a contribution to society and want to do something useful. So what the basic income for the arts project showed was that on average, the artists were spending a lot more time doing their artistic work and a lot less time doing other stuff that they had been forced to do in order to put bread on the table.
You mean other kinds of jobs, waiting tables, I guess, that kind of thing?
Sure, all that kind of stuff, yeah.
Interesting. Does it always work like this, though? I mean, I saw a basic income experiment in the US where the participants who did get some money did indeed work less. Why do you think it works for the Irish artists, but it didn't in this specific US case?
Well, actually, the results of the two pilots aren't that different. I mean, in the American case, which was about 1,000 participants in two locations in the United States, they showed that they worked maybe an hour or two less in their paid work, and that they devoted the bulk of that extra time to leisure. And in fact, in the Irish case, they also showed that the recipients of the basic income for the arts had an hour or so more leisure in their lives than the control group. So there isn't that much of a difference. And I guess part of the issue is that if you're a low paid person with a irregular job that might have to be working very long hours, then if you get a bit of a hand up by getting a basic income, you might well decide to cut back on your hours. That's not such a bad thing.
Right, yeah. Are you saying it's kind of fundamentally wrong to see it as automatically a bad thing if people who get this money do indeed work less?
Oh, absolutely.
Why did Ireland decide to experiment with basic income in the culture sector? Like, is there a reason why we might need this kind of scheme for people that work in the arts more than other industries?
People who work in the arts in Ireland anyway, and I think that's probably true more globally, do have very precarious lives and economically. Their work is intermittent. It's often low paid. Sometimes they're expected to work for free. They're told that it'll give them exposure, but exposure doesn't put any meals on the table. And they're doing stuff that is useful for society. But then the work that lots of other people do that is also low paid and precarious and uncertain does also contribute to society. So I would see them as one among many groups that could make a case for basic income.
But the way it works with this artist scheme is that Irish artists and creative people getting this money will get the money even if they start doing really, really well, even if they become like the next, like Irish Beyonce or CMAT, I guess we could say. What is the argument for continuing to give this money to artists who don't actually need the cash to make ends meet each month?
In all universal basic income schemes, the way it works is that you introduce basic income, but you also change the tax regime so that people who are at the upper end of the income scale are paying more in extra tax than they're getting in basic income. Now, in a pilot project, whether it's the BIA or whether it's any of the other pilot projects that we've seen around the world, it's very hard to simulate that taxation part of the basic income scheme. But you could do that in principle in even in the basic income for the arts scheme by introducing some kind of surtax on high incomes for artists who are doing very well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, we have quite a lot of means tested things here, and they're often based on like last year's tax returns. And for people that do have fluctuating income, which includes a lot of artists, that kind of thing is really annoying because it means, like you might get less money this year based on what you earned last year. And it's like you're actually strapped for cash this year. It doesn't make a lot of sense to do it that way. I can see the logic for this.
Yes, I mean, means testing is the worst way of targeting income for people who have intermittent and insecure incomes.
I mean, in France, we have this thing that kind of resembles what Ireland is bringing in for culture workers. And we've had it for many years. It's called the intermittent system. And it's only for workers in quite a narrow slice of the creative industries, which is different to the Irish system. So it's people who work in live performance, essentially. But the people who get this money in France actually get quite aggressive criticism targeted at them. People accuse them of being lazy, saying they don't deserve it, even though these payments, they really haven't kept up with inflation, and it's not the huge, generous handout that the critics think it is. Are you worried that Ireland might see the same kind of backlash against artists with this scheme, that people will start thinking about artists as like spoiled, state-funded layabouts, basically?
Well, I think that a lot of people don't realize the precarious situation of most artists. I mean, one of the things that the research reports showed in the BIA pilot was that something like half of all the artists that they surveyed met the criterion for being in material deprivation, and that 3/4 of them said that they had difficulties making ends meet. There's still a case for universality because even artists who are doing quite well, or anyone who's doing quite well, can fall on hard times. They can lose their jobs. I mean, AI could take over their job and then suddenly they're out of work. There could be a pandemic and suddenly they're out of work. So they still have that payment to fall back on if suddenly their main source of income goes away. But the other thing I'd say about the idea of backlash is that, a backlash can work in two directions. You can either say, oh, isn't it terrible that these artists are getting this money? Let's take it away from them. Or you could say, oh, isn't it great that those artists are getting that money, but why can't the rest of us get it? And that's the path towards universal basic income. There are a lot of misconceptions about what Ireland is doing here. I mean, what we've had is a pilot that gave 2,000 people 325 euros a week for 3 years. They're going to get their last payment in February, and then those 2,000 people will no longer have any support. The department is in the business of designing some successor to that scheme. We don't know how much money it's going to be. We're pretty sure that it's just going to be another 2,000 people for another small period of time, 3 or 4 years, something like that. So it's a bit like if you were a drug company and you were running a pilot randomized control trial on a drug that was supposed to deal with some kind of chronic illness, and you ran it for 3 years and you found that actually it made people's lives much better off and so on and so forth, well, the natural thing to do would be to then extend that drug to everybody in the population, right? But that's not what's happening here at all. What's happening is saying, okay, well, this was good for these people who had this chronic illness for 3 years. Now we're going to take the drug away from them. Or we're going to give the drug to another 2,000 people for another 3 or 4 years. Then we're going to take the drug away from them and we're going to give it to somebody else. And that's kind of crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, why don't you think they're being more ambitious given that the results have been pretty good? Is it just a question of being scared because it feels like a kind of radical idea?
Well, I think that it has to do with the money. I mean, they don't want to put the money into it. They're treating this as a support for the arts, so they see it as being part of the budget of the Department of Arts and Culture, rather than seeing it as a support for people who are in a precarious position, in which case it might be part of the budget of the Department of Social Protection, and it would be a tiny part of the budget of the Department of Social Protection, but it's a very big chunk of the budget of the Department of Culture.
Thank you so much for joining us this week, John.
My pleasure.